Well, good afternoon or good morning, and welcome to our virtual road trip webinar series. I'm Molly Berry with ATS, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on board today as we host a SAPA roundtable with representatives from around the country. With new ideas and technologies making an appearance in our industry, different states take different approaches. So how do our state representatives help moderate the conversation between owners and specifiers and contractors? Well, you're about to find out. Now, although most of us, if not all of us, are Zoom experts by now, I'm going to cover just a couple housekeeping items. The attendee controls appear at the bottom of your screen. You are in listen-only mode, but we do encourage you to participate in the conversation. So you can raise your hand and ask your question during our webinar. Tanya will unmute you so you can ask that out loud. Or you can always enter your questions or comments into the Q&A box. And now I'd like to introduce our panel. Reed Ryan is the Executive Director of the Utah Asphalt Pavement Association. He joined the association in 2012 as the organization's first Executive Director after working in Washington, D.C. as a legislative aide and public affairs specialist. He earned his BA in political science from Brigham Young University and his JD from the George Washington University. Kirsten Fowler is a licensed professional engineer and the executive director of the Asphalt Pavement Association of Indiana. She joined the association in 2016 after working in quality control and transportation design. She graduated from Purdue University and is on the board of directors for Women of Asphalt. Mel Monk is a licensed professional engineer and the executive director of the Alabama Asphalt Pavement Association. Mel joined the organization in 2002 after working at PSI in Virginia and for the Alabama DOT. Mel earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Auburn University. Charlie Goodhart is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Asphalt Pavement Association. He joined the association in 2015 after working in a variety of positions at PennDOT as an independent consultant and as the director of the infrastructure practice at KPMG. Charlie earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from Shippensburg University. Gary Hoffman is a licensed professional engineer and the director of technical services for the Pennsylvania Asphalt Pavement Association. Prior to this role, Gary served as the association's executive director, as well as numerous positions at PennDOT, including chief engineer and deputy secretary of highway administration. He earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in civil engineering from Drexel University. Tanya Nash is a licensed professional engineer and the pavement materials engineer here at ATS. She joined ATS in 2018 after working for PRI, the Florida DOT as the bituminous materials specialist, and the University of Florida, where she earned her bachelor's and master's degrees. So as we prepare to depart, we'd like to thank you for choosing ATS as your preferred travel provider today. Please take a moment to locate your nearest exit. Remember, in some cases it may be behind you, but most of you can locate yours in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Enjoy your trip.
Thank you, Molly. I want to first open up and say thank you to all of you guys for joining us and agreeing to come on and talk with us a little bit about what's going on in each of your states and how you guys are reacting to the different movement of the industry. Overall, you know, I would imagine everybody at the tip of their tongue right now, some of the big words, you know, it's the buzzwords, the balance mix design. Oh my goodness, what are we doing? Who's doing what? What are you specifying? Where are your limits? So those all things like that come to mind, but I think people kind of forget sometimes that other things are going on as well. For instance, that all of you have different special mixes and special items to address. For instance, some of you have thin overlays, so highly high performance ones. You got SMAs on the books. There's new mix design methodologies. So there's a bunch of things that we get to talk about. Unfortunately, we only have 1 hour. So I know that we could probably go on for quite a while. But I do want to go around around my screen to ask you guys to open up with just give me a description of how each one of your APA organizations are structured to help communication between your members and then your owner agencies, whether it's the state or a local agency involved in the asphalt world. So I'm going to start in my left corner, which is Gary and Charlie. And let's hear about what Pennsylvania is doing.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to discuss what's going on in Pennsylvania. Let me start out by saying we started, and I guess Gary could probably give you the exact date. We started an asphalt pavement quality improvement committee. I guess it's over 20 years.
Early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. It's been over 20 years now. With PennDOT, both Gary and I were at PennDOT at the time. And the Asphalt Pavement Quality Improvement Committee, anything related to asphalt payments, as far as specifications or testing or any design, anything like that goes through the committee. It's composed of 7 members from the asphalt industry, and that's the Pennsylvania Asphalt Pavement Association, and 7 members from PennDOT. It also includes a representative from the Federal Highway Administration, their Harrisburg Division Office pavements engineer, and also a representative from the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. So we work collaboratively, and we push a lot of things through there. And really what happens after that, once we get to the point of agreeing, and a lot of times we won't even have to take a vote, we just agree. And it comes out in a clearance transmittal for review, and then eventually becomes a specification. The other things we do collaboratively with between industry and the association, we do a PennDOT PAPA bus tour, where we actually go out, we take 100 from industry and academia and PennDOT and the legislature. We actually get 40 to 50 people from PennDOT. We go out on a bus tour for a day and look at asphalt actually being laid down, and we look at the plant where it's being produced. We might even be able to visit a quarry if the plant's in the quarry, the lab testing lab. Then the next day we actually do a half-hour what'd you learn, and then hot topics. We do 3 regional technical meetings a year, and we do of course our annual association conference, which is coming up in January. So we do a lot of collaboration, communication, and cooperation with PennDOT, with Pennsylvania Turnpike, which are the big owners. Over probably 45,000 miles of highways in Pennsylvania. So that's pretty much the outreach we do there. And Gary might want to.
A quick add, two additional opportunities we have is we work with the local transportation assistance program. We do some training with them. We go out, do some forensic analysis for local governments on issues that they might have. And we also participate in the training and certification program for asphalt field technicians and for lab technicians.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you, guys. It sounds like Pennsylvania is super involved, and that's fantastic. Mel, we're going to move to you. Let's hear about how Alabama is structured.
A lot of what we do, and we have a really, really good working relationship with our State Department of Transportation. They're obviously the one that writes the specifications and the procedures that, even for the most part, the counties and cities use, and even the private entities. So we have a couple of liaison committees. We have a large level, sort of a high level liaison committee, and a QCQA committee that we meet with the DOT on a regular basis. And our goal is basically to work together for a better product. I think we do a really good job of communicating with each other. We don't want something to come up that either side brings something up and we'll go, wow, never heard of that, and didn't know that was a problem, and didn't know this was a big problem. So if we can address it before it becomes that big problem, I think it's good. It's about relationships. I still believe we are a relationship building industry. It's being able to, before COVID, looking each other in the eye and sitting down and going, how can we solve this problem? But, even during COVID, it's picking up the phone, it's texting, and we have a good relationship where just so many of our DOT people can call me, text me, and it's our contractors too. They're all open and going, hey, if there's a problem with one of my projects, I may not know about it, but my owners are going, hey, call me directly. Because sometimes if you're a big owner of a company, maybe you don't know what's going on every piece of every project. All of my owners are like, hey, you've got my cell number, text number, don't hesitate to call me. So it's just relationships and continuing to work together, and again, not letting those little small problems fester into something big. Let's handle it before it gets big.
Hey, thanks, Mel. I agree. The surprise moments are not the ones that we want, at least in this occasion. So, Reed, I think Utah is up next. Let's hear about what happens out in the west side.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the call today. I just wanted to say thanks to ATS and everyone involved and help setting this up. I think conversations like this are important. And as the only representative, I think, from the wrong side of the Mississippi, I'll try to add a little insight on what's going on out this way in Utah. I think for us, I kind of look at two themes programmatically within UAPA. One is making sure our internal house is in order. And the way we do that is making sure that we have high functioning committees that are meeting regularly, that have agendas out in advance, that the members know that they can bring business to those committees and make sure that their concerns or what they view as an opportunity or a challenge has a home, that where it can be heard and at least discussed internally within the association. We try to line all those ducks up in a row and herd all those cats behind the closed doors and make sure that we have our business in order before we ever go out publicly towards our agency. And that's proved beneficial over the 10 years that I've been in place here with UAPA. Those have been some hard discussions behind closed doors, but those have also been some great discussions. So I think making sure that that is in line and making sure that we structurally have the right policies, procedures, sort of the internal, building blocks of what makes a good association in place, and having to build this group up from the ground up, essentially with UAPA, that was important for us. Once we were able to accomplish that, I think now how we liaise with those agencies becomes important. And we're structured very similarly to my counterparts. I don't think I can add much there. I'll add just one insight that we implemented this year with UAPA. So prior to, we have quarterly meetings, we liaise on different projects, we talk about project outlooks, we do all of those things externally with our DOT and with others. One thing we did was we realized that we were talking at some point to like our materials folks at the DOT, and at another point sort of with the executive level at the DOT. And sometimes those two groups internally, we realized, didn't know what each other were doing or what they viewed, things as priorities. So this year we brought, within our DOT, we brought our materials folks and the executive folks into the same room then with our industry, with UAPA. And we were able to partner with the material side of folks to essentially have a show and tell to executive level of the DOT to say, these are all the great areas which we are working with each other. These are the areas that we've accomplished really good things. This is where we're currently at right now, some of the challenges we're going through, and this is what we anticipate to be future challenges. And we walked away from that meeting. We had owners and presidents of companies here in Utah saying that was one of the best meetings that they've ever been to, because we were no longer sort of taking the left arm and the right arm and making sure that they were trying to, tell the same story. We had them everyone right in the same room. So we look to kind of continue that, and I would view that as a major innovation for us from UAPA's. It's probably, old hand for Mel and for Charlie and those guys that have been around for a long time. But for us, it was a very good and beneficial way to kind of go out and approach our DOT.
That's great. Thank you very much. Communication, it sounds like the key thing here all the way around. Kirsten, let's hear what the Midwest is doing.
Yeah, so much of the same things as to what Charlie and Gary and Mel and Reed said. But I will add that here in Indiana, we're actually going through a process where we're restructuring our technical committees that interact with NDOT. We historically had what we would call kind of like our construction and materials group. And then we had a separate group that handled more of our design and our big picture conversations. And so those operated very independently with entirely different groups from NDOT. And it created challenges when you were having, the same conversations with two totally different groups of people. So we're putting in place kind of more of like a pyramid structure to where we're going to have at the top that big picture executive level interaction and set up 3 to 4 regularly occurring meetings each year. And then that group will be able to filter down to 3 separate groups, a materials, a construction, and a design working group. And then from there, we'll have task forces on very specific topics. And we think by structuring that way, that'll allow us to, do a good job of being able to manage all of the different topics that come up, all the different input the industry needs to have on changes going on at NDOT. And it'll also allow us to involve as many members as we can, because that's one of the challenges for SAPA, is to keep groups meeting with a DOT manageable in size, but also make sure all of your membership is represented. So that's kind of the change we have going on at NDOT, and I'm excited to see what comes from it.
Thank you. So I commend all of you for continuing the communication line for between your groups and the states and the different agencies alike. I think all of you are describing some fantastic things, and maybe we can continue to learn from each other as we go through. On that note, let's tackle that topic that everyone really wants to know about, is that balanced mixed design and the implementation of how we're moving forward. And so if we're going to go through a couple of, this is each one of you just kind of give me a very quick generalized, what kind of is your implementation plan? Where are you as a state? And if you have any main challenges or key lessons learned that you might want to share with another state that isn't quite at that level yet, and any kind of new items or information that might have come out of it. So we're going to go backwards. We're actually going to start with Reed, and let's see what Utah is doing on their balanced mixed design.
Well, it is the hot topic that, asphalt is not very sexy as an industry, but I certainly think this is probably one of the sexier terms that are out there right now, right? Is balanced mixed design and where states are at. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit about where Utah is. We are at the very what I will call sort of the foundational or formative stages of implementing a balanced mixed design specification within the state. We do have performance specs in place, such as the Hamburg and others. And now we're looking essentially at the ideal CT and trying to formulate what the right number will be for that cracking test in Utah, and how do we go about implementing that. For us, we learned a couple of things, I think, from the very start. Not all equipment is equal, and we learned that with the Hamburg, right? So this term I never thought I would ever say in my life, these sinusoidal waves with Hamburg, testing equipment, and there was a difference there, and I had to learn about it and what that difference was, but it made a difference in the way those tests came out. So our producers are very careful now when they're starting to make these capital investments to make sure that they're getting in line with the DOT, in terms of purchasing the equipment that the DOT supports. So we don't have those kind of problems. And that was a big lesson learned for us as well. So we're at that stage on the private side of sort of lining up the money and the investments. And then with the partnership with the DOT, we created a task group. We call it our UAPA, UDOT Cracking Test Task Group. That's a mouthful. And we have our first meeting at the end of the month. Our hope is to kind of settle in on some numbers and run the spec as a shadow spec in 2022, and then look towards a better or full implementation come the 2023 construction season.
Great. Just a really quick follow-up, Reed, you had talked about purchasing equipment. Excuse me. Was there any hesitation by the industry as far as having to purchase a device such as a Hamburg? I mean, that's not a small piece of equipment by any means. Did you get any pushback, or what was the turning point that allowed them to go, okay, yes, we will move forward with that?
Yeah, so I think that's a great follow-up question. So we've had Hamburg in place for a while, and we had different manufacturers of the equipment that were purchased to different producers here in the state. And so they were all using different ones. And then this whole sinusoidal wave thing came up, and it kind of freaked everybody out a little bit. And I think that's remained in the back of people's minds now that they're looking to make another significant capital investment purchase, right? When you're talking about ideal CT and cracking test equipment. And that's really where our discussion began, is from the lessons learned from that with the DOT is, hey, as the DOT, you're comfortable with this, we're comfortable with this. Do we feel like the two will perform adequately? Or if not, what have you read? What can we understand from each other to make sure that, we don't want to introduce more variability into these tests. That's killer when it comes to these things. So as much as we can control and eliminate that and have those discussions up front, it's that much more important. And that's one of our big takeaways that we've had now. We're taking this next sort of venture down performance testing.
All right, great. Thank you. Mel, how about Alabama? I know that there is I guess the word on the street, I guess you could call it, was the fact that, the county spec for balanced mixed design seemed to come out before a DOT spec. So were there challenges in that, or how can you explain to us how that happened?
It is. Well, how it happened is when we first started talking about balanced mixed design, our DOT started looking at maybe what test do you use? I mean, what is the cracking test? There's a lot around the country. What is the rutting test? Sort of early on in working with the industry, we said, well, whatever you use from our viewpoint, because we're going to have to do this in 80 different site labs around the state, is we would certainly like a test that is not a new piece of equipment that's a lot of expense and then something that gives us an immediate result. We need to know right now whether we're good or not. So we went with a version of the ideal CT and a version of the indirect tensile test for rutting. And basically both of those are with a very small investment. You use your Marshall press and your regular pills to get results. So we like that idea. It's less of a monetary investment, probably about $5,000 or so to maybe 10 per lab, depending on how you do it. And you can get results the same day. So once we made a decision, those were sort of the tests we're running with. The DOT developed some procedures, and the DOT, we have an advantage of NCAT being right here in Alabama. And the DOT relied on NCAT to help with them with some advice. And we had a couple of counties sort of jump up to the forefront and go, hey, we think we want to use this now. And the DOT and us, I think it was a very good thing of going, okay, maybe there's less red tape to let a county go ahead and do one right now with county only funds. So we're able to do that. A couple of counties have tried this not only on a trial job, but on some of their normal purchase order work. It's the data we've got has been very valuable to collect. Both projects and the purchase order work seem to have went well. I think at the end of the day, you sort of want to look at the owner, which for me was talking to the county engineers and going, all right, you think this was good, bad, better, worse, the same? And generally they think, well, we think we got a better mix. And that's what you want to hear. I think the reason they think that is because of us having to, the rutting test really was not a problem meeting. It was more of the cracking. We were able to put more wrap in the mix, but we had to put more liquid AC. So I think from a county standpoint, they saw liquid AC and thought durability increase, which I agree with. I have no problem with putting more liquid in the mix. So I think that went well. The biggest thing our DOT is doing right now before they move forward, right now, any mix design that comes in from one of our contractors has to have extra material, and the state DOT central lab runs the cracking and rutting test. Is beginning to create a large database of our existing mixes. I think that's real important going forward, because in Alabama in particular, we have a wide range of aggregate sources we use. We use local sands, manufactured sands, river gravel, granite, sandstone, steel slag. So just so many different materials. And we've seen a little bit of those numbers vary a little bit on those material combinations. So I think aggregates are a big part of this. We're going to have to really get our hands around, but I think we're doing a really good job of data collection right now. And once we get that data and start sorting it, I think then we're looking at maybe a trial project next year with the DOT under some circumstance. So I think it's a lot to look at, but I think it's going well.
Great, thank you. I think that's really neat that your counties decided to step up to the plate and really kind of take charge of that. In Pennsylvania, your guys balance mixes, and I know that you guys are in the implementation phases. I do have a little bit of a specific question with your balance mix design in mind, is that you guys face something that, us in Florida are very foreign to, which is cold weather, right? So you guys have that thing called snow that hits the ground, and we are faced with that. So I know that there's the cracking tests that we think of as intermediate cracking and fatigue, but did you guys consider looking at a low temperature portion of your balance mix design and on top of something like an ideal and a Hamburg?
Yeah, Tanya, we are in the in the early stages of balance mix design. We've decided on a test. We're using Hamburg for rutting, and we may use Hamburg for moisture sensitivity. Right now, we're looking at ideal CT, but and DCT. We've also looked at flexibility index and Texas overlay. So we're looking at all of those. One of the things that we may end up doing when we try to establish thresholds, it may not be one threshold for the entire state, because we have very high freeze thaw indices and across the state. We in the southeast and Philadelphia area, not too bad. Up in the northwest part of the state, lot colder temperatures, we have to be more concerned about that. So we're looking at that this year. We're collecting data like Mel is doing down in Alabama. This year we have 55 projects, 5 projects in each 11 districts, where we're doing cracking and rutting testing on all the wearing and binder mixes, just to start to develop a database. Next year, it's going to be a requirement for all JMF submissions for wearing courses to accompany rut tests and cracking tests for those mixes. So we haven't set any thresholds yet, but we're doing all this testing to collect the data to establish some thresholds. In Pennsylvania, we have about 6,000 JMFs approved annually across about 35 producers and over 200 plants across the state. So it's a big effort to weed through all of that and find out where we need to be with thresholds for rutting and cracking on different levels of roads.
That's fantastic. It sounds like you guys are doing a bunch of work, which is great to hear. Kirsten, we're going to move to Indiana. And now I know you guys at Balanced Mix Design, it's kind of taken a different turn, right? So you guys have started implementing the system called Pave 5. Can you kind of highlight a little bit of Pave 5 and if there's any big changes that happen for acceptance for you guys?
Yeah, and I'll say for us, performance testing is still very much on our radar. We know that, balanced mix design and the innovation that accompanies that is the future of the industry. So for us, we're still at the, data collection and, trying to get repeatable results and things like that with performance testing. But in the meantime, our DOT has taken a great interest in improving the quality and the durability of our asphalt pavements from a volumetric standpoint. And this concept of Pave 5 was really led by Jerry Huber from the Heritage Research Group here in our state. Pave 5, just I guess for those of you that aren't familiar with it, to kind of like explain the concept. In the lab, instead of designing at 4% air voids, you target 5% air voids, and you greatly reduce the number of gyrations that the mixes have. And then when you get it to the field, instead of getting an in-place density during construction of 92% and hoping to gain density through the life of the pavement, you target closer to 94, 95% in-place density right off the bat from construction. And you do that by changing your aggregate structure. VMA was increased by 1%, so you're still getting enough asphalt content into the mix. You're still getting that film thickness that you need, but you've now got higher density. And as we all know, density is king when it comes to the life of pavements. And the conservative estimates from our DOT just from 2020 alone was that through the estimated added life that they anticipate getting from the pavements, they were able to save approximately $41 million. And we see that not necessarily as money saved, but more dollars that can go towards more tons in our state. So it's been a really fantastic collaboration between industry and NDOT. We haven't seen any rutting, which was something that we originally thought was a risk with doing those lower gyration mixes. But all around, performance is indicative that we're gonna see that longer life that we were anticipating. So yeah, I definitely would say it's a success story of how industry and NDOT worked together on solving a problem.
That's great. Now, so I know you had mentioned that you guys are still collecting data for performance-wise as well. So are you seeing any differences between your 4% design mixes compared to your 5% design mixes in those performance values?
Yeah, we are. And, part of it is trying to understand what those targeted inputs should be and what those design thresholds need to look like. And then not necessarily being able to use, data that's coming from across state lines, which we wish we could take advantage of and learn from. So, I will say too that one of the things that has popped up is that from some of the performance testing, we're not seeing necessarily some of the things like additives or higher grade binders recognized through those results. And so we're kind of taking a step back and saying, is it because there's something wrong with the performance test, or is it because we believe that those added costs and things, are supposed to be leading towards better performance and better durability, but they actually aren't. So I think that's a really important thing when you look at performance testing, to look at it holistically and open-minded, from that perspective.
Perfect, thank you. So I noticed that there was a couple of comments that have popped up, or questions, I should say. So let's see if we can get some of these answered as well. We have a question from Deborah London, who is asking, what is the best mix for saltwater intrusion? So our coastline folks, if you guys have any opinions on.
But we can answer that from Pennsylvania if you'd like.
Sure.
We have a lot of salt water.
Well, we don't have a lot of salt water, but I worked a lot of years at PennDOT, and probably 20 years ago, we implemented anti-icing with salt brine. So we make it out of solar salt, and PennDOT puts over, I don't know, 1.5 million gallons down a year on top of the pavement surface. And they put that down there ahead of storms. And I would say this: I'm not saying there's not any appreciable damage caused by that, because they usually put down probably at least 1.5 million tons of regular salt also. But if the tighter the mix, the more dense the mix, the less permeable it is. So what we did last year is we worked with PennDOT, for instance, to try to take the top off of the density spec. In other words, go to allow the contractor to go up to 100%, but they didn't buy that, but they did go up to 98.5%. And from what we know from our PWL spec and the results we've seen, last year we were up to 94.5% average density, which in most, I guess, wearing courses, Gary, would give you a pretty impermeable layer. So that would keep the salt from going down into the other layers. Now, if it's salt brine coming up from the subsurface or from the base or something like that, it's a different story. But the better the density, the tighter the mix, the smaller the size aggregate in the mix, 9.5 down to 6.3 down to 4.75. That's more asphalt. That's less voids. That's the tighter the mix. That's the less salt intrusion you're going to have.
We want to, most of our pavements are 9.5 millimeter wearing course. There's only one district that still uses 12.5. We've bumped up the top end of the density, like Charlie said, and we're expecting that 94.5 average to go up 0.5% or maybe a full percent to 95, 96% average. So that's getting pretty dense. And we're watching the rutting potential, of course.
Agreed. I would have to agree. The tighter the mix, the better the prevention of any type of intrusion you get, whether it's salt water, regular water, etc. So anybody else have any comments on the salt water? I know Utah, you're surrounded by salt water, right?
Yeah, so we have the Great Salt Lake, but it's drying up, so it's no longer a problem. We actually, I would just say amen to what good friend Charlie and Gary said there in Pennsylvania. So we do the same thing. Like when the storms are coming, the DOT is out and they're actually pre-spraying all the roads with the same sort of mixture. And I would say I would second everything they said as far as closing mixes down, making them tighter and increasing density. Then you're on the right path.
All right, thank you guys. So we have a question from Steve McReynolds. And the question is, are any of the state DOTs for the states on the panel considering any additives or processes that may enhance performance numbers other than adding additional AC? So is there anything else besides just saying, let's put more asphalt in the mix?
Tanya, I don't want to steal the thunder from the other folks on the call here, but we've looked at a lot of polymer modified asphalts in the different mixes, and we see across the board you know, going with a 76 minus 22 PG or 64E, if you will. But we're seeing 3-4 times the crack resistance that we get with a standard super dense graded super pave mix. And that's across the board on all of those crack tests that we looked at. So there is an advantage from using a polymer modified asphalt, and there are lots out there.
And we've tried ground tire rubber mainly through the wet process. And we've done it blended at the plant. We've done the pre-blended. We've gotten excellent results out of both. A lot of, you know, extended performance. I guess we're trying a couple projects this year, one in the east and one in the west with plastic waste. I guess it's been processed, but we have there's 2 projects now. Neither one of those are being done by PennDOT, but they're in cooperation with PennDOT. So you know, as far as additives goes, I guess that's.
Yeah, we're 100% war mix state in Pennsylvania. We are looking to get some federal research dollars to do some high mod projects this year also, so that could be beneficial.
And of course, we allow aramid fibers and that sort of thing in our mix too, and we've had good performance from those.
Thank you, guys. And I would go ahead, Reed.
Oh, I was just going to mention, so we're on similar paths with fiber. We put a lot of fiber mixes out in the state. Warm mix, same thing. So we're not a true warm mix state. We had some pretty serious conversations we just had their public APWA Utah chapter conference here at a session dedicated to actually true warm mix. I think we've got a couple of cities that are going to give us some projects to actually do that next year, which we're really excited about. But as far as using warm mix additives, almost every mix ton that goes out the door is using them for the other benefits that have come along with those and mixes now. So I think that's a big thing for us. And then this year we had a very interesting high mod project out at our port of entry on the west desert of Utah. And, you know, one of the worst test sections that you could ever put a trial project in, we put it at the port of entry where you have heavily loaded trucks starting and stopping. We paved a high mod single lift pavement 7 inches thick and put it down, and it was awesome. And it's getting a lot of attention, and it passed the Hamburg. Everything that we're talking about intuitively that we thought, oh no, we're gonna you know, shoot ourselves in the foot. We're learning, you know what, we can do this, and we can start thinking differently about asphalt mixes. That's what's exciting for me in this industry is, you know, some of these things that we talk about, whether it's Marshall, you know, Marshall now is what, 70-ish plus years around, or more. Actually, it always feels like it's 70, but it's even more now since, you know, World War II, when that was really invented and taken hold. Super Pave, now we're talking, you know, 30-ish years or so plus. So it's really, it's on us now to be that next generation of thinkers and say, you know, just because we've done it this way doesn't mean we always have to do it this way. So we point to that trial project out at the port of entry, and it's had nothing but resounding success. We had all the higher ups at UDOT there actually watching it go down. And it is different, and you have to pave it different. You have to compact it different, but the performance is certainly there. So we're excited, and I would say high mod is a great way to go and something to definitely think about.
Yeah, I would say that this is a good segue in the sense that, you know, the idea of using these performance tests are really trying to push that innovation level, right? It's not about, you know, specifying use this material, use this rock, put it in at this percent, and this is what the specification says, so this is what I do. It's not necessarily about the recipe, but it's going to be about however you decide to put that cake together. Let's make sure that it actually performs for an extended amount of time. So looking at it from the sense of, you have a lot of these different additives coming out, whether it's chemical, whether it's the recycled plastics, whether it's fibers, all of these things. Big topic right now is all the recycling agents that can help the contractors really achieve some of these higher performance numbers. Is there any push in the states to actually try and get some of these innovative products to be used in order to be able to achieve some of these numbers, other than just adding another 0.5% of asphalt?
Tanya, one of the things that we did assist the contractors in meeting the performance tests, or we lowered the design voids, allowable design voids down to 3%. We just recently reduced the number of gyrations from 3 levels, 100, 75, and 50 to 2 levels, 75 and 50. That's going to help, but I believe, we're looking at rejuvenators in the state. You're right. I used that example quite a few times. We have a recipe to make a cake, but the proof is in how that cake tastes at the end of the day. And that's what these performance tests are going to do for us. And I think our state's open to looking at rejuvenators, looking at different products out there to help us achieve those performance tests that we're looking for.
Thank you, guys. We do have another question from Connie Lorenz. She's saying that we have a great success in Florida using asphalt rejuvenators along both coastlines to help extend the life of the asphalt, condition the pavement, and increase the ductility. So I guess just the comment saying if Florida does use some of the asphalt rejuvenators, that would be the surface rejuvenators, not necessarily the terminal bend or the plant add. We do have another question about balanced mix design. Somebody's asking, how are your states tying balanced mix design lab test results to actual extended performance in the field? That's a great question.
Yes, yeah.
If you have answers, please.
Tanya, I keep jumping in here. Can't keep my mouth shut. We're out there. That's the proof's in the pudding, and that's what we're trying to do with these performance tests, is to predict what's going to happen. Well, I'm not going to be around for 20 or 30 years to see if my predictions are true, if the tests are true. What we're looking at, we have a list of some great performing pavements that have performed 20, 25, 30 years with minimal maintenance. We're going to go out and try to ascertain the mixed properties there. We're going to take some cores, bring them back, analyze the cores. So we got the back end. Now we're trying to backtrack and see how the performance test would determine why these different projects lasted as long as they did.
Okay. So for instance, Kirsten, you Super Pave 5 had been implemented for a full year, correct? Since 2020?
Sure.
So are you guys finding that with all the research that Heritage did with developing the limitations or the specification around the design and then the actual construction, are you finding them to correlate well with the field performance that you're seeing?
Yeah, we are. And I think partly because it's more of a volumetric, structure, right? It was changing specifications and moving goalposts and moving targets. And really, I think we were fortunate in that, we sometimes you gotta take a stab, right? You gotta guess and set those parameters. And I think the research that was collected and the pilot projects really gave them a lot of that good information to where when we did move forward in 2020 with full implementation, we knew where we needed to be. The contractors had slowly ramped up and they were prepared with mix design. And so far, the first Super Pave 5 mix, I think, has been down maybe 6-7 years at this point in time. And, of course, we have several that, have been down now 3 or 4 years, but so far everything we're seeing is that added performance is there. And Tanya, I want to just add one thing to all the conversation related to the additives that I think is really important for contractors and SAPAs and DOTs to all work together on. And that's that, when it comes to additives and these new technologies that offer what we believe to be value and durability, with them comes additional cost a lot of times, right? And you run into this chicken and egg concept of until your DOT recognizes that value and is willing to compensate a contractor to take advantage of that new technology and innovation, it's difficult for a contractor to just move forward with putting that into a project. So I think one of the things that SAPAs have to do that's really important is kind of help mediate what those needs are, what those opportunities are, and then help the DOT work through pilot projects and work through specs and test out a lot of these innovations so those can be recognized earlier on, and things like life cycle and, you know, and bonus structure and whatever it may be. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation as we went through a lot about additives.
Yeah, that's a great comment. You know, I would like to follow up with the idea of that, you know, we're adding asphalt to the mix. You know, asphalt, as we all know, just a straight up asphalt mix with no special anything in it. That's the most expensive part of our mix. So we're adding another 0.5% plus of asphalt binder into the mix, and it seems like the agencies are okay with that. And I'm not sure whether it's because they're familiar with it and they understand that concept, or if it's just because that's what they expected to happen. So they're kind of moving along that line. I don't know personally what that breakout is comparative to, for instance, a recycling agent that goes in versus adding 3 to 4 tenths of asphalt, you know, where that break point is. But I would think that if you can only add maybe 2 tenths of asphalt and then add maybe 0.5% or up to 2% of this additive or the recycling agent, are we breaking even as opposed to just straight asphalt, or are we really adding extra costs on top of extra costs? So I guess that would be the follow-up on that. Mel, I do have a question for you. You had mentioned something about how you guys are collecting data made a comment about Alabama's aggregate and the diversity of the aggregate that you guys see. I know a lot of, for instance, this conversation just went from additives, which are mostly binder related, right? They're asphalt binder modifiers, and they change the chemistry of the binder. Well, what about those aggregates? Do you feel like, from what you guys have seen in Alabama now, that the aggregates are playing a bigger role than most people are giving them credit for?
I would say yes. I think from some of the data we've seen, the aggregates are going to be an important part of this puzzle. And again, I think it's going to depend on the state you're in. I know some of my counterparts in some states have very consistent aggregate sources throughout the state. It's just that we don't, and it's when you get into the different aggregate types, now you're looking at aggregate properties, which particularly affect your mix design and the amount of AC needed in a mix. We go from our gravities on our aggregates, we may have a 2.5 or a 2.6 of our limestone and river gravels, and then we'll have some slags that may be a 3.2 or 3.3. Same thing with the absorptions. The absorptions may go from a 0.4 or 0.5 up to close to 2%. And when you're talking about that, and then, okay, you're adding more liquid to the mix. Well, is it effective asphalt? Well, you've sort of got to fill up the absorption in your aggregates first before you get the effective. And that's going to be hard to compare to. It was interesting. I think Charlie and Gary said, well, maybe they're going to have different levels of performance test numbers for different parts of the state. That's something that we just in our mind said, well, would that be something we would get into? And then logistically, how do you do that? Where's the magic line you draw in the state and go, anything above this line is this number, below this line is this number? So it's something we've got to look at. I think as long as we continue to do our quality of aggregates, particularly as far as our angularity counts, our fine aggregate angularity, our coarse aggregate angularity, I think that is really, in my mind, solved a lot of our rutting problems. If you've still got some, I think we've solved the liquid by going polymer based. We've done some high mod jobs in Alabama with success. So I think all that's the case, but I think there's great points being made about the economics of it. You have to look at the economics of, okay, we can do this. It's going to add a price. It may add a benefit. You know, what jobs do you want to do that on? Can you do that on every job and every system? So it's a balancing act, because I think we can do more and more stuff with our mix now. But you know, like I said, all that comes with a cost that you've really got to evaluate. So I think that's just part of the conversation with the DOTs and the industry and the contractors going, okay, what does this do to my cost? And is this something that's a benefit? And we just have to answer those questions.
So I want to kind of flip the switch a little bit and go across the country to Reed and ask you a little bit about something that I know is also a hot topic, which is the EPD topic. I know that this is something that I think everybody has at least heard of, but it's always seems to be this underlying murmur of like, ooh, it's coming, it's coming. And I know that one of your neighbors, Colorado, is really on board with it. They're kind of moving forward with some. I think you had at one time mentioned to me that Oregon possibly is also on board with it, and they're moving forward with projects. Can you kind of talk to me about how neighboring states' decisions influence you as a SAPA? Does that weigh in your mind and how you present information to your members?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer that. And it's interesting here because we're so geographically spread out a little bit differently than the East, right? We have a lot of miles in between us, but news travels fast, just as fast in the day and age which we live in. And indeed, Utah is nowhere near on the radar screen of EPDs on moving anything forward in terms of it with the state legislature or state politics. Now, that doesn't preclude the fact that most likely our federal government is headed that way very quickly and may start tying dollars towards such things. And that's something that we have to be cognizant and aware of and give a heads up onto our members. Now, more locally or regionally focused, our state DOT has a meeting called the Four Corners meeting. They get together, obviously with the 4 states that share that corner, and they have that meeting once a year, and they share what's going on in their states, what's working, what's not working, and it's very likely that things like this can come up at that meeting. Other regional venues, such as like the Rocky Mountain User Producer Group and other things, are often venues where things like this start getting talked about and how they affect industry across the board. And then those DOTs, we found, like with UDOT, that DOT will then take it back and ask our SAPA, what's going on and what can we do about this, or what do we need to do about this. So whether we want to turn a blind eye or not is not necessarily the best strategy for any one of us, a SAPA or individual contractor or otherwise. Just because what usually, and this is how it's the old adage, right? That politics is everywhere and politics matter. And I'm not just saying that because I have a JD in political science and I was one of those political science graduates that actually worked in politics versus flipping hamburgers at Burger King. It matters because it's everywhere. And it's more prevalent in our lives than ever, for better or for worse. I mean, these are the realities with which we're dealing. And we have a major bill. We have 2 major bills right now in Congress that have huge implications for our industries. And not only here with EPDs, but other things like, social justice for transportation. Are those 2 terms that we ever thought we would tie together? And we may say, oh gosh, like it doesn't matter, but it's going to matter. So we might as well be proactive about it and do our best, whether, states like Utah may be lagging behind or other states may be leading. And whether we're leading in the right direction or not, that's another good question. So long-winded answer, a political answer, I guess, since we're talking politics here, but those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you. That is great. And Charlie and Gary, I do want to kind of follow up a little bit on that question in a different aspect, because you guys, unlike the West Coast where they're spread out quite a bit, you guys have several states up in the Northeast. And I would imagine, especially once that you get into the corner where the states are a little bit smaller, there are contractors that bridge those borders. So do you guys get affected by decisions that are made in your neighboring states up in the Northeast corner?
Yeah, I would say, particularly the Mid-Atlantic, Pennsylvania kind of aligns more with like Maryland, Delaware, New York, even to Massachusetts, but not too much more further north than that. But there's a pretty, right now, the Environmental Product Declaration, in case somebody didn't know what EPDs was on the call, we tend to talk in acronyms a lot of times. So, it's close. If you got the New York Port Authority, which is a pretty big animal, going to implement EPDs for transportation materials. That's a pretty big influence on everybody else. So a lot of these things start on the West Coast or the East Coast, and they come to the central part of the state a lot of times. What we did with stuff like this, with potentially emerging issues or opportunities, however you want to look at it, is we actually had Joseph Shackett from NAPA come to our environmental webinar in April and make a big presentation on EPDs and what the impact might be on our industry. And it was eye-opening. And I would say that NAPA has developed a tool. If you're a NAPA member, you can take advantage of it. It's going to be a lot easier for NAPA members who have access to this tool to implement if it actually gets passed, like Reed was saying, in the Infrastructure Investment and Job Acts or the reconciliation bill or whatever Congress passes. So, but we're close to Washington too. So, DC. So a lot of this stuff happens down there too. So, but yeah, it's influenced. We stay on top of it. The Mid-Atlantic groups, all the SAPAs. We have in fact, we just had a conference call this week. We talk about issues, opportunities, and problems, and what's going on in everybody's state that might come north, might come south, might come east, might come west. So
Great. We do have a couple more questions online. Hopefully we can get to a couple of them. We have one from Alicia Brooks. It's asking, are there any DOTs participating in contracts that aren't low bid, or has that discussion arisen anywhere with the balanced mix design adoption? We're still all low bid.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, right? And unfortunately, it's one of these primary drivers in our industry that, for better or for worse, it is the underlying current. And we had a little bit of a discussion around the costs associated, right? And those costs matter because we all operate in this low bid environment. And I think at times I begrudge it, and at times I wish it wasn't in there. But then you start looking at alternatives, and I'm not sure where you would go, from there otherwise to keep a fair and level playing field. So it's one of those things that you have to address and deal with. I think on the costing side of things, and to that discussion, the colleagues on the call here made some really good points, and I would just add that it's good to have a SAPA where I think you can kind of help moderate and show moderation in some of those discussions, because there's all these different things that start coming at the DOT. And I know our DOT now comes to UAPA and says, well, what about this? What have you heard about this? What can you tell us about this? And I think they've looked to us as, we're involved in the industry, and obviously we're a little self-serving towards industry, but they also looked at us as an objective voice when it sometimes comes to some of these things. And that takes time from a SAPA to build that kind of relationship with the DOT. And I'm sure everyone else on this call is very protective of that relationship with their DOT as well, and will be, honest and straightforward with them, because that capital, that political capital, is important in the business that we work in as SAPAs.
Yeah, absolutely. And have any of you ever had a member that has said, well, why don't we just propose and show them the difference between, so if this is your pie in the sky, right? You want performance to this level. This is what it would take. If you want that from the aspect of this is what we have material wise, this is what we know of, and this is what it would be. So this is the cost comparison to what it would be if I just said, okay, well, cost is not an issue. And then if we start whittling it down to, okay, well, we're not going to do that. So we need to be under this budget line. And then what does that take out? What does that remove from that gold, ultimate mix that performs 100 years down to what we can actually afford to do? So what is that gap difference?
Tanya, we have a contractor here in Pennsylvania, Lindy, who has won the Sheldon Hayes Award 5 times. And they're always looking to innovate, very, very forward. And they will go to the DOT and ask the DOT to work order in some initiatives and look at them on a job that they got low bid and say, let's demonstrate, let's evaluate this product or process on this particular job. And a lot of times they'll do it at no additional cost to do that.
Well, that's great. Thank you. Give me one last 30 seconds. We have one question up here. It says, anyone have experience with fiber fortified mix? And I'm going to look at Mel only because you are fortunate enough to be in that state with NCAP. I do know that they had put a few sections down with the fiber mixes. I know Fortifiber is present. I know that Pennsylvania also uses Fortifiber. But have you guys seen any of that and adopted anything coming out of the test track results?
we added, we use fibers in all of our OGFC mixes to help with drain down. Fortify is one of the options of the fibers DOT allows because of performance. They've saw that it performs well. So that's an option there. We tried a pilot job 3 or 4 years ago with some Fortify fibers. I think seemed to go well. Certainly, I think the DOT is looking back on some cost analysis now on some of that. But so that's sort of where we're at now. Not a general application, probably other than OGFC option right now.
All right.
All right, thank you guys so much. This was such a great session. We can all be so focused on what's going on in our respective states. I thought this was a great learning opportunity for us, to get some insight into what's going on around us too. Thank you, Mel, Reed, Kirsten, Charlie, Gary, and Tanya for your time today. That was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you to all of you who are tuning in as well. We are scheduled out with these sessions through the beginning of next year, but at any time, feel free to email me if there's a topic you would really like to see covered, or you want a little more insight on. We're happy to consider different options as well. So stay tuned for details for our next trip that's going to depart in October. I'll be sure to be emailing you. And thank you all again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, guys.